The burden of James White. James White, a 25-year-old young man with eyes that bore the weight of early responsibilities, felt life's pressure tightening each passing day. It wasn't just any burden. It was a complex web of medical debts left behind by his late father, an honorable and hard-working man during his final years. James, a promising architecture student at the Federal University, saw his dreams and aspirations slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. Every line he drew, every model he passionately built in the studio, was now overshadowed by the looming shadow of unpaid bills. He loved the feel of pencil on paper, the act of creating spaces that could improve lives. But financial reality had become a monster devouring both his passion and his energy. College tuition, once a priority, had now become an unattainable luxury compared to the mounting hospital bills and the expensive medications his mother still needed, weakened by the loss of her husband. The home he grew up in, a modest place full of memories, was at risk of being seized by creditors. The smell of his grandma's cornbread, the height marks on the kitchen wall, the laughter echoing through the rooms, all of it was on the verge of vanishing, replaced by an irreversible emptiness. Every debt notice felt like a stab to James's heart, leaving him powerless in the face of it all. He often wondered how a system could be so cruel as to strip everything from a family already torn apart by grief. He spent his nights wide awake, hunched over books and projects, not out of passion, but out of desperation. The words and diagrams in his architecture textbooks blurred together with the figures of debt swirling in his exhausted mind. During the day, he worked at a local cafe, serving cappuccinos and forced smiles, while his brain churned through numbers and schemes to pay off the debt. He tried to be courteous and efficient with every customer, but inside, he felt like a ghost, watching his own life fall apart. The scent of fresh coffee and pastries no longer brought him comfort, just a cruel reminder of the carefree lives of his customers compared to his own overwhelming reality. His friends, unaware of the depth of his suffering, kept inviting him to parties and get-togethers, but James always declined, offering up flimsy excuses. "I've got a big test to study for. I'm on a tight project deadline. I'm not feeling too well." Phrases that rolled off his tongue with painful ease. The truth was, he had neither the time nor the money for leisure. His life had been reduced to studying, working, and trying to preserve his family's dignity. Exhaustion was his constant companion, and hope, a fragile thread threatening to snap at any moment. It wasn't just physical fatigue, it was soul-deep weariness, an emotional burnout from carrying too much for too long. One day, after a long shift at the cafe with aching muscles and a foggy mind, James came home to find his mother sitting at the kitchen table, a letter in her hands and tears in her eyes. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by her quiet sobs. He knew instantly it wasn't good news. It was yet another notice, this time a final deadline for a significant payment. The deadline was tight and the amount overwhelming. James felt a lump in his throat, the same throat that seemed to tighten more with every new debt. He hugged his mother, feeling the frailty of her body and the strength of her spirit, trying to offer a comfort he himself didn't have. He wanted to scream, wanted the world to stop spinning just for a moment so he could catch his breath. At that moment he realized he needed a drastic solution, something beyond his daily efforts. The situation was dire and time was running out. Every tick of the clock on the kitchen wall was a cruel reminder of the urgency. He was willing to do anything to save his family from impending ruin. The pressure was immense, and the feeling of helplessness was consuming him. Looking at his mother's tired face, worn down by grief and worry, he silently promised himself he'd find a way, no matter the cost. Night fell and James stayed awake, the light of his bedside lamp illuminating only the thoughts that haunted him as he searched for a way out, a flicker of hope to guide him out of that pit of despair. The silence of the house was interrupted only by the sound of his own thoughts, echoing in his mind like an endless drumbeat. He knew life wouldn't wait for him, and that inaction was his greatest enemy. The urgency pushed him to consider every alternative, no matter how unlikely. He was at a dead end, and the only way forward was to find a door, even if it was hidden in the shadows of despair. His mind raced through every possibility, the wild and the unthinkable, in the desperate hope of finding one sliver of light. The unexpected proposal. Amidst this atmosphere of uncertainty and anguish, which had lingered for days after the last notification, James's phone rang. He was finishing one of his shifts at the cafe, his mind still weighed down by problems, when the device vibrated in his pocket. It was an unknown number, with an area code from another city, which only made him hesitate more. But something urged him to answer. On the other end of the line, a deep, firm female voice introduced herself as Isabella Miller. Her voice was clear, articulate, and carried a tone of authority that James hadn't expected. He frowned, trying to remember where he had heard that name before, but nothing came to mind. Could it be a mistake? A telemarketing call at such an inconvenient moment? Isabella was direct, with no small talk, giving James no time to ask questions. She knew about his family's financial situation, about the debts that haunted him. James's blood ran cold. A shiver shot down his spine, a mix of fear and surprise. How did this woman, a complete stranger, know about his life, about his most intimate struggles? It felt like an invasion, a violation of his privacy that left him stunned. Before he could ask, before he could even begin to process how she got that information, Isabella made the proposal that would change the course of his life. She would pay off all his debts, every last cent, in exchange for his marriage. James was speechless, stunned by the boldness and bizarreness of the offer. Marriage? To a complete stranger? And why? The word marriage echoed in his mind, stripped of any sense of love or affection. Why would a wealthy woman, who clearly had the means to solve her own problems, want to marry a broke student with no prospects, like how he saw himself at that moment? His mind raced to find logic, a plausible explanation for such absurdity. Isabella sensed James's hesitation, evident in the prolonged silence on the other end of the line, and continued, explaining the terms of the agreement with calculated coldness, as if reciting a legal contract. The marriage would be only on paper, a contract of convenience, with no emotional or physical obligations. She needed a husband for a specific period to resolve personal and business matters, which she did not specify, and James, in his vulnerable situation and apparent discretion, seemed like the ideal candidate for her purposes. She assured him that he and his family would be safe, that all his financial needs would be met, and that his mother would receive the best medical treatment available. The proposal was tempting, a miraculous escape from the problems that suffocated him, a light at the end of a tunnel filled with darkness and despair. Yet the idea of marrying for money without love or any emotional connection repulsed James. His romantic, idealistic soul, one that believed in affection and mutual growth, revolted at the notion. He had always believed in relationships built on care and mutual respect, in a genuine partnership that transcends material things. This felt like a business transaction, a sale of his freedom and of his deepest principles, a negotiation that turned him into an object, not a person. James's internal conflict was overwhelming, a whirlwind of emotions and contradictory thoughts. On one hand, there was the unmatched chance to save his family from imminent ruin, to guarantee his mother's treatment and recovery, to preserve the home he loved so dearly, the refuge of his memories. On the other hand, he would have to forsake his deepest values, step into a life of appearances next to a woman he barely knew, in a fake marriage, cold and empty. He thought of his mother, of her tireless sacrifice over the years, and of the hope she placed in him, the hope for a better future. He thought of the sleepless nights, the physical and mental exhaustion that consumed him, the pain of watching his family suffer. Isabella's proposal, as strange and inhuman as it first seemed, represented a lifeline in a sea of hardships dragging him down. He asked for time to think, to process the colossal information, and most of all, to talk to his mother, his safe harbor and trusted advisor. Isabella agreed, her voice calm and unhurried, giving him exactly 24 hours to make the decision that would seal his fate. When he hung up, James felt the weight of the world, not just on his shoulders, but in every fiber of his being. This was the hardest choice of his life, and the consequences, uncertain, hung over him like a dark cloud. He knew that any path he chose would come with a price, a loss, a sacrifice. But the price of doing nothing, of letting his family fall into ruin, seemed like the highest of all, a cost he could not bear. The decision and the marriage. James spent the night wide awake, tossing and turning in bed, with Isabella's proposal echoing endlessly in his mind. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed amplified, each second a form of torture. The dilemma was excruciating, a true battle between reason and emotion, between duty and desire. On one side, the dignity of his principles, the respect for his values, and the dream of a future built on true love and passion for his profession. On the other, the harsh and relentless reality of suffocating debt, his mother's fragile health demanding urgent care, and the imminent loss of everything he knew and loved. His childhood home, the few memories of his father.
At dawn, with the sun rising on the horizon in hues of orange and purple, James made the hardest decision of his life, a decision that tore at his soul, but quieted his mind. There was no other viable way out, no more time to search for miracles or conventional solutions. He had to accept Isabella's proposal, bitter as the pill was to swallow, no matter how much it hurt inside. Family came first, always. That was a mantra his father had taught him, and one he now engraved into his own heart. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility, not as a burden, but as a purpose on his shoulders, and an odd, unexpected sense of relief for finally reaching a conclusion, for choosing a path. The uncertainty was over. Now came the action. With a heavy heart but a firm voice, James sat down with his mother that morning to talk. He explained the situation as delicately as possible, omitting the most painful and cruel details of the arrangement, but making it clear that there was a way to resolve the family's financial problems, a lifeline. His mother, with the wisdom and intuition only mothers possess, with a gaze that seemed to see right through him, noticed the anguish in his eyes, the pain behind his resolve. She questioned him, concerned about the sacrifice he was about to make, the magnitude of what he was giving up. James, however, stood firm in his decision, assuring her with all the love he had that everything would be okay, that he would be safe, and that the family would be protected. At first, she resisted, sensing the sting of something precious being lost, but faced with his persistence and unwavering resolve and the undeniable severity of their financial crisis, she eventually relented on the solemn condition that he would remain safe and happy, no matter the cost. The conversation was difficult, filled with silent tears and tight embraces, but necessary, so the decision could be shared and understood. James felt a knot in his throat as he saw the sadness in his mother's eyes, the pain over his choice, but he knew with cold certainty that he was doing what had to be done, the only possible path. The wedding was a discreet, almost secret event, held in a distant registry office to avoid curious glances and awkward questions. Only Isabella's lawyers, with their impeccable suits and serious expressions, and a few of James's relatives, with worried faces and anxious eyes, were present. There was no party, no crowd of guests, no joy or excitement that usually accompanies such a meaningful union. It was a legal act, not a celebration of love. James wore a borrowed suit, slightly too big in the shoulders, making him feel out of place. And Isabella, a simple yet elegantly understated dress that accentuated her regal figure without making her seem any more approachable. The vows were spoken with cold formality, devoid of emotion or affection, rehearsed words that lacked soul. James felt like an actor in a play, performing a role that wasn't his own, a farce for a limited audience. The ring on his finger felt heavy, a symbol of a business deal, a weight on his freedom, not a bond of true love. He looked at Isabella, a woman he barely knew, her face unreadable, and wondered what the future, now bound to hers, had in store. The ceremony was brief, a blur of papers and signatures, and soon they were officially married, sealing their fates in a way James never imagined. In the end, Isabella looked at him with an enigmatic gleam in her eyes, a look James couldn't decipher, a mix of triumph and perhaps something subtler, almost like regret. He felt a chill down his spine, a premonition that this union, which he hoped would be the end of his problems, would bring much more than he could imagine, secrets and challenges he could not yet comprehend. The contract was sealed, the signatures made, and the new phase of his life, however uncertain and nightmarish it seemed, had finally begun. He was now tied to a woman who was an impenetrable mystery, and to a future that looked like a maze with no apparent exit. Life after marriage and hidden motives. After the rushed and almost ghostly ceremony, James moved into Isabella's imposing mansion, a place that exuded wealth, but seemed saturated with a dense mystery and an oppressive silence. The first days were strange, filled with an almost suffocating formality, as if he were living in a museum where every move was calculated and every word measured. Isabella maintained a distant demeanor, treating him with a politeness that bordered on indifference, as if he were a luxury guest, but not a husband. She made no effort to get to know him, nor did she show any interest in his past life or his future dreams. Communication was strictly functional, limited to domestic matters or rare comments about the weather. James in turn tried to adapt to this new and surreal reality, navigating through opulent corridors and meticulously maintained gardens, feeling like an intruder in his own home. Every step on the polished marble echoed through the vast mansion, amplifying his loneliness. He spent most of his time in his bedroom, a luxurious space with fine furniture and a breathtaking view, but impersonal, more like a five-star hotel room than a cozy home. The nights were long, filled with oppressive silence and the aching absence of his mother, whom he loved deeply. The loneliness was palpable, a heavy cloak that enveloped him, and the absence of his old life, his simple routine, made him question constantly the decision he had made and the consequences of his sacrifice. Isabella, despite her initial coldness and calculated distance, began to subtly reveal small glimpses of her personality, like cracks in a flawless facade. She was a woman of strict habits, with a meticulously planned, almost military routine, from the breakfast schedule to the moment she retired to her chambers. She spent hours in her office, a sanctuary of secrets with double doors and heavy curtains, dealing with business that James didn't understand, with names and terms that were always vague and generic. Meals were served in near complete silence, with few words exchanged, and the tension in the air was nearly as palpable as the scent of gourmet food. James tried to initiate conversations, asked about her life, her interests, about the past, and even the present. But she always deflected, with impressive skill, maintaining an impenetrable barrier that kept him at a distance. This evasive posture, combined with her sudden and inexplicable marriage proposal, without any prior connection, began to stir and sharpen James's curiosity, which had so far been focused only on his own pain. He knew, with a growing certainty settling in his chest, that there was more behind this arrangement. Something Isabella was hiding from him, something beyond mere convenience. James's intuition, sharpened by his life experience on the streets and his innate need to protect his family from any threat, warned him of ulterior motives, of a hidden plan beneath the polished surface of his new life. The little details, initially dismissed as the eccentricities of a wealthy woman, began to pile up, forming a mosaic of suspicion. Isabella received mysterious phone calls at odd hours and spoke in code or whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. She displayed an excessive concern for the house's security, reinforcing doors, installing new cameras, and checking alarms repeatedly, as if she were constantly expecting a threat. Confidential documents were locked away in her office, and she always seemed one step ahead, anticipating moves James couldn't decipher, as if she were playing a complex game whose rules he didn't know.
One night, when the house was steeped in silence and the lights had gone out, James, unable to sleep, decided to grab a book from the library near Isabella's office. As he passed by, the office door was slightly ajar, and James heard fragments of a whispered conversation. Words like inheritance, clause, and deadline floated through the air like ghosts, triggering even greater suspicion and a chill in his gut. He quickly hid, his heart pounding in his chest, listening to what sounded like instructions to a lawyer or an accomplice. He realized, with shocking clarity, that the marriage wasn't just a convenience for Isabella, it was a key piece in a much larger game, a high-stakes game involving fortunes, and perhaps more. A game in which he, unknowingly, had become a pawn. James's curiosity turned into an urgent, inescapable need to uncover the truth, to unravel every secret Isabella was hiding. He needed to understand what was going on, not just for his own safety, which now seemed at risk, but also to protect his family from any unexpected consequences that might emerge from this web of mystery. The mansion, once a golden refuge and symbol of security, now felt like a luxurious prison, and Isabella, a sphinx with deep and dangerous secrets. James knew he had to act, but with extreme caution, so as not to awaken the wrath of the woman who was now his wife, a woman who appeared more powerful and unpredictable with each passing day. Discovery of hidden truths and investigation. The growing suspicion gnawed at James's mind, turning every thought into an endless pursuit of answers. He could no longer ignore the signs, the furtive glances from Isabella, the whispered phone calls, the reinforced security of the mansion that now felt more like a fortress. There was a secret, a big and dangerous one, and he was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. James began his own investigation, moving with the calculated discretion of a private detective, navigating through the shadows of the mansion. He knew that a single misstep could jeopardize everything, not just his own safety, but also his mother's and the future of the family for whom he had sacrificed so much. His first course of action was to closely observe Isabella, paying attention to her routines, her interactions with the staff and rare visitors, and especially the documents she handled in her office. He noticed that she spent hours locked inside, immersed in piles of paperwork and endless phone calls. Driven by curiosity, distrust, and a desperate need to protect his family, James waited for the perfect opportunity to access that sanctuary of secrets, the heart of the mansion and the center of the plot. One afternoon, while Isabella was out attending one of her mysterious hours-long appointments, James saw his chance. With his heart racing and adrenaline surging through his veins, he made his way to the office. The door was secured with an old-fashioned lock, but James, thanks to his architectural studies, where he'd learned about structures and mechanisms, and a stroke of luck, managed to open it using a hairpin and meticulous patience. Each click of the pin echoed like a gunshot in the mansion's silence, every movement a calculated risk. The office was organized chaos, piles of documents atop a solid wooden desk, old dusty books stacked on floor-to-ceiling shelves, and a concealed, built-in safe hidden in the wall. James started digging through the papers, feeling like an intruder, yet driven by urgency, looking for anything that could shed light on the mystery consuming him. He found bank statements showing large transactions, contracts filled with convoluted clauses and baffling legal jargon, and letters mentioning unfamiliar names and cryptic terms. The more he uncovered, the deeper the web of secrets grew, revealing a network far more intricate than he had imagined. Among the papers, hidden beneath a stack of accounting books, James discovered an old will, the will of Isabella's late husband, yellowed with age. As he read the document, his eyes widened in shock, and the blood in his veins turned cold. There was a clause, a crucial and cruel one, stipulating that Isabella would only inherit the full fortune if she remarried within 6 months of her husband's death. The deadline was fast approaching, with only a few weeks left, and marrying James, the desperate, indebted young man, was her only way to meet the condition and secure her wealth. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with brutal clarity, revealing the true nature of the agreement. The unexpected proposal, the rush to get married, the coldness in their relationship, the secrecy surrounding the ceremony, it all made sense now, a cruel and calculated sense. Isabella didn't love him. She didn't want him as a husband. There wasn't a shred of genuine emotion in her offer. He was nothing more than a means to an end, a disposable tool to secure her fortune, a pawn in a chess game of wealth. The discovery was painful, a betrayal of the small amount of trust he had naively started to place in her, a blow to his pride. But the pain quickly gave way to burning determination, an unshakable will to fight back. James knew he could no longer be a pawn in this dirty game, a puppet in Isabella's hands. He had to confront her and demand the full truth, no matter how harsh it was, no matter how much it hurt. His investigation had led him down a dangerous path, a point of no return, but he was ready to follow it, no matter the cost. His family's dignity and his own were worth more than any fortune. With trembling but steady hands, he took photos of the documents with his phone, ensuring he had undeniable proof of what he had discovered, a safeguard against any denial. The game had changed dramatically, and James was no longer the naive, debt-ridden student who had accepted Isabella's proposal out of desperation. He was now a man in pursuit of the truth, ready to fight for his dignity and the safety of his family, even if it meant facing the powerful woman who was now his wife. Confrontation. With the evidence in hand, the photos of the documents burning in his pocket and the raw, brutal truth hammering relentlessly in his mind, James could no longer delay the confrontation. Every minute of waiting was torture, a prolongation of the farce. The anger from being manipulated and the disappointment from broken trust churned in his chest, forming a storm of emotions. But the cold determination to expose Isabella outweighed any fear. He waited for the right moment, Isabella's return from one of her mysterious errands, when the mansion would be quiet and they would be alone. When she entered the living room in the late afternoon, with her usual lofty posture, a forced smile on her lips, and those calculating eyes, James intercepted her. He stood in the center of the room, fists clenched, jaw locked. His eyes, once filled with hesitation and innocence, now burned with an intensity Isabella had never seen before, a fire that took her by surprise. She noticed the abrupt change in his demeanor, the unusual stiffness in his stance, and a slight, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body, betraying a crack in her icy facade. "We need to talk, Isabella," James said, his voice steady, slicing through the room's silence like a blade, without the slightest trace of hesitation or fear. Isabella tried to mask her surprise, feigning calm, asking about his day in a monotonous tone, but James didn't budge. He didn't let her dodge. "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. I know everything," he replied, each word charged with conviction. Without hesitation, he moved decisively and threw onto the marble coffee table the yellowed will, the photos of the incriminating documents, and the bank statements he had found, scattering the irrefutable evidence before her. Isabella's smile vanished instantly, and her once flawless face paled, revealing a near sickly pallor. She tried to argue, to stammer some denial, but James cut her off mercilessly, reciting the will's cruelest clauses and the exact dates that exposed her deception and manipulative scheme. Isabella's mask of control and composure finally crumbled completely, revealing a frightened, cornered woman, vulnerable for the first time. With nowhere left to run and the truth laid bare, Isabella broke down. She sank into the sofa, her regal posture now slumped in defeat. The tears she had held back for so long, tears James never imagined she was capable of, ran down her cheeks, revealing a hidden humanity he had never seen. She confessed everything: the suffocating pressure from her late husband's family, the constant threat of losing the fortune she had built over the years, and the overwhelming desperation that had led her to propose that marriage of convenience, the only solution she could see. She explained, between sobs, that her late husband, a controlling, vengeful, and cruel man, had included that abusive clause in his will to ensure she couldn't enjoy his wealth unless she was bound to another marriage, unless she had an owner, even after his death. Isabella felt trapped, with time running out, and James had appeared as the only solution, a pawn in her desperation. She begged for forgiveness, not just for the deception and the lie, but for how she had used him, manipulated his emotions and his vulnerability, pleading with a choked voice for him to try and understand. Isabella's confession was a complex blend of relief for finally telling the truth and pain at the stark reality now facing James. He felt sorry for her, a genuine sorrow for her tragic story, but the hurt from her manipulation still cut deep, an open wound to his trust. The truth, however painful and shocking, was a vital step toward healing for both of them. The confrontation had been explosive, filled with tension and revelations, but it was necessary to bring the charade to an end. The invisible walls Isabella had built around herself, the emotional defenses she used to protect herself, crumbled one by one, and James saw for the first time the woman behind the mask of wealth and power, a broken, desperate woman. Their conversation extended into the night as Isabella revealed details of her life, her deepest fears, her frustrations, and the humiliations she had endured. James listened closely, absorbing every word, realizing that her story was far more complex and tragic than he had imagined, a labyrinth of suffering. That confrontation, which he thought would be the end of everything,
The final rupture ended up becoming the beginning of a new phase, an unexpected path toward mutual understanding and perhaps even forgiveness. Revelations and consequences. Isabella's confession echoed in James's mind, not as a shout, but as a continuous whisper, bringing forth a cascade of complex emotions. The initial anger that drove him to confront her gave way to a complex mix of pity, understanding, and a pang of guilt for having judged so quickly without knowing the depth of her pain. Isabella's story, that of a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, subjugated and then manipulated by a vindictive will that forced her into a new charade, was far more tragic and dark than he had imagined. However, the truth, as much as it explained Isabella's desperate actions, did not erase the fact that James had been used, turned into a tool, and that his family, indirectly, had also been caught up in a complex and dangerous scheme. The consequences of this revelation began to unfold inevitably, like dominoes, affecting not only the lives of James and Isabella, but also those of others, especially James's mother and their reputations. The first and most immediate impact was the looming legal threat. The family of Isabella's deceased husband, powerful and influential, upon learning of the convenience marriage, could contest the will on grounds of fraud, alleging Isabella had manipulated the situation to secure the inheritance. This would mean not only the loss of fortune for Isabella, but also the public and humiliating exposure of James and his family, dragging them into a media scandal he had sacrificed so much to avoid. James's reputation as a promising law student would be at stake, tainted by involvement in fraud, and his career prospects could be compromised before they even began, destroying his professional dreams. Furthermore, the press, always eager for sensational stories and scandals involving wealth and betrayal, could turn both their lives into a media circus, exposing intimate details and twisting the truth to create shocking headlines that sell newspaper. James and his mother's privacy would be brutally invaded, making them constant targets of curiosity, gossip, and public judgment, with no chance to defend themselves.
Another immediate and equally worrying consequence was the strain on James's relationship with his own family, especially with his mother. Although she had accepted the marriage out of love for him and trust in his decision, she was unaware of the extent of the manipulation and the real risk James was taking by marrying a stranger under contract. The full revelation of the truth, that James had been a pawn in a scheme to secure an inheritance, could deeply shake her trust in him, causing her to question his decisions and the security of his future, fearing for his well-being. James feared his mother's reaction, the disappointment in her eyes, the pain in her heart, and the possibility that she might feel even more vulnerable and unprotected after all they had already been through. The situation was delicate and complex, with many loose ends, and James knew he would need a lot of patience, honesty, and unconditional love to rebuild his mother's trust and ensure his family's safety, both financial and emotional, protected from further harm. The mansion, once a symbol of security and luxury that seemed to solve all their problems, now seemed like a minefield where every step, every revelation, could trigger a new explosion of troubles threatening everyone. James and Isabella found themselves facing an abyss, with the urgent and desperate need to find a solution for the overwhelming consequences of their choices, for the tangled mess they had created. The truth had been revealed, but the price to pay for it was still uncertain, hanging like a sword over their heads, and the road to redemption seemed long and arduous, almost impassable. They needed to act fast, think through every move, before the consequences became irreversible and dragged them to a point of no return, to total ruin. Redemption and new beginnings. Facing the precipice of imminent consequences, with the legal threat and public exposure hanging over their heads, Isabella, for the first time in a long while, felt the real and overwhelming weight of her actions. The confession, though painful and humiliating, had become a catalyst for a deep change within her, an awakening to reality. She no longer wanted to live under the shadow of fear and manipulation, bound by the chains of a past and a vindictive will. James's vulnerability, his brutal honesty, and his willingness to listen, even in the face of betrayal and the pain she had caused him, touched something in her heart hardened by life and wealth. Isabella realized that, despite all her material wealth and luxurious life, she was profoundly alone, isolated in her golden fortress, and that the fortune she so longed for would not bring her the peace and true happiness she secretly desired. She decided, with a rare conviction, that it was time to fight, not only for her inheritance and her freedom, but for her dignity and for a genuine chance at redemption, to clear her name and conscience. And for that, she realized, with a clarity she had lacked before, that she would need James's help, the young man she had manipulated. James, in turn, despite the deep hurt and betrayal he had suffered, could not ignore the fragility and despair Isabella had shown during their confrontation, the humanity she finally revealed. He saw in her not just the woman who had deceived and used him, but also a victim of cruel circumstances and a legal and social system that had cornered her. His empathetic nature, forged by his own struggles and his fight to protect his family, compelled him to reach out, to offer a way out of the abyss. He knew that together, united by a common purpose, they had a better chance of facing the colossal challenges ahead, unraveling the legal and social web they were caught in. The first step, after the confrontation and decision to fight together, was to devise a meticulous action plan. Isabella, with her deep knowledge of the legal world and strategic connections, and James, with his sharp intellect, thirst for justice, and newfound determination to expose the truth, formed an unlikely but powerful alliance. They dedicated themselves tirelessly to gathering more evidence against the family of Isabella's deceased husband, searching for loopholes in the will, evidence of bad faith, and manipulation that could support their defense. The nights at the mansion, once silent and distant, filled only with loneliness and mysteries, were now alive with heated discussions, meticulous strategies, and a growing sense of camaraderie and partnership. They spent hours in the office, which had once been Isabella's sanctuary of secrets, but was now the operations center for both, not as forced adversaries, but as partners in a common cause. James discovered a different Isabella, a smart, insightful woman with a sharp mind for law and strategy, and behind her cold facade, a dormant sense of justice now awakening. Isabella, for her part, saw in James not just a talented young man and promising student, but a man of unshakable character, with an integrity that surprised and inspired her. Gradually, the initial mistrust and resentments gave way to mutual respect, and respect blossomed into an unexpected and deep friendship, which solidified with each day of working together. They shared their stories, their deepest fears, and their most secret hopes, building a solid bridge over the abyss that had separated them at the beginning of their relationship. Their relationship evolved from a cold, purely financial contract to a genuine connection based on mutual understanding and unconditional support, a partnership that went beyond material matters. The mansion, once a place of loneliness and appearances, gradually began to transform into a welcoming home, not only for them, but also for James's mother, who was invited to live with them, bringing warmth, joy, and life that had long been missing from that place. New beginnings were blooming amidst the ruins of the past and the complexities of the present, and hope, once a fragile thread threatening to break, now became a vibrant and strong flame, illuminating the path toward an uncertain but promising future. They were building something new, something far beyond money and inheritance, something real, meaningful, and deeply human. Forgiveness and justice. The legal battle that followed was arduous, exhausting, and full of twists and turns, but James and Isabella, united by a common purpose and strengthened by the alliance they had built, faced every challenge with unwavering resilience and determination. The family of Isabella's deceased husband, arrogant, powerful, and confident in their position of advantage, underestimated the pair's resolve, believing they would be easily defeated. James, with his sharp mind and growing legal knowledge, acquired through much study and practical application, dismantled the fraud accusations by presenting irrefutable evidence he had gathered, exposing the malicious and vengeful intentions behind the testamentary clause that had cornered Isabella. His argument was precise, his logic impeccable, and his passion for justice evident. Isabella, for her part, gave testimony with brutal and painful honesty, revealing to the court the manipulation she had been subjected to and the desperation that had led her to accept the marriage of convenience without hiding her own mistakes. Her voice, once cold, was now full of vulnerability and sincerity, touching many in the courtroom. The truth, as complex as it was, and despite revealing dark layers of relationships, began to prevail over lies and appearances. After weeks of emotional testimonies, exhaustive document reviews, and heated legal debates, the court issued its final ruling. The clause in the will was declared abusive, humiliating, and null, granting Isabella the legitimate right to the entire inheritance, free from the constraints imposed by her deceased husband. Justice had been served, not only in a legal and bureaucratic sense, but also in a moral and human sense, bringing closure to a story of manipulation. The victory was bittersweet for Isabella, who, despite securing her fortune and freedom, had lost valuable years of her life in an unhappy marriage and an endless quest for validation that never came. However, the constant presence of James by her side throughout the process and the genuine friendship that blossomed between them brought a new and profound meaning to her existence, a purpose beyond money. She realized with previously unreachable clarity that true wealth was not in the material possessions she had acquired, but in human connections, in the ability to forgive others' mistakes, and above all, in the ability to be forgiven for one's own. For James, justice was clear confirmation that he had made the right choice, even though the path had been tortuous, painful, and full of uncertainties. He had saved his family from financial ruin, ensured the treatment and recovery of his mother, and in the process found an unexpected ally and friend in Isabella. Forgiveness, once a distant and almost abstract word, became a tangible reality in his life. He forgave Isabella for using him, understanding the extreme circumstances that led her to act in such a desperate way, and feeling compassion for her pain. And more importantly, he forgave himself for doubting himself, for feeling like a pawn in a bigger game, and for letting despair blind him. That chapter of his life, which began with despair, uncertainty, and a cold contract, was closing with a deep sense of peace and renewed purpose. The relationship between James and Isabella, which started as a soulless contract, transformed into an unbreakable bond of respect, affection, and deep friendship. Through their trials, they learned that life is full of twists and turns, and that true strength lies in the ability to adapt to change, to forgive oneself and others, and to find light and hope even in the darkest situations. The mansion, once a stage for secrets and intrigue, became a home of harmony, acceptance, and human warmth, where James's mother thrived in her recovery, and where the friendship between the two protagonists deepened each day, enriching their lives. Their story became a living testament that, even in the most unlikely and complex circumstances, forgiveness and justice can pave the way for a new and promising beginning, transforming the unexpected into something beautiful. The legacy of an unexpected connection. Time, with its inexorable passage and its ability to heal wounds, wove new threads into the tapestry of James and Isabella's lives, embroidering a future they could never have imagined. The mansion, once a stage for secrets, intrigues, and loneliness, transformed into a vibrant home filled with genuine laughter, meaningful conversations, and the comforting aroma of homemade meals prepared with care. James's mother, recovered, healthy, and happy, thrived in that environment, finding in Isabella a loyal friend and confidant, and in James the son who had become an extraordinary man, a pillar of strength and compassion. The relationship between James and Isabella, which began as a cold and calculated contract, matured into a deep, unbreakable bond based on mutual respect and affection, a living testament to the human capacity to transcend adversity and find beauty and meaning in the most unlikely circumstances. With Isabella's unconditional support and invaluable mentorship, who became his counselor and friend, James graduated with honors in architecture, standing out as one of the most promising students in his class. He not only excelled academically, but also developed a sense of purpose far beyond building structures, a passion for impacting lives. He dedicated himself to social projects, using his architectural expertise to create spaces that promoted inclusion, well-being, and dignity in underprivileged communities, transforming neighborhoods and lives. Isabella, in turn, rediscovered the joy of living, a joy she thought she had lost forever. She actively engaged in philanthropic causes, using her vast fortune and influence to support charities and projects aimed at educating and empowering vulnerable youth, offering them the opportunities James had so desperately sought in his past. Together, they formed a dynamic and inspiring duo, joining their strengths, talents, and resources to make a significant difference in the world, leaving a lasting legacy of compassion, solidarity, and justice. The lessons learned throughout their extraordinary journey were many and profound, etched into their souls. They learned that forgiveness is not an act of weakness or submission, but one of immense strength and courage, capable of freeing imprisoned hearts and building bridges of understanding where once there were chasms of pain. They learned that trust, once broken and shattered, can be rebuilt, brick by brick, with unwavering honesty, infinite patience, and mutual commitment. And above all, they learned that the true meaning of a human connection does not lie in social titles, fortunes, or material possessions, but in the genuine ability to care, to support unconditionally, and to love in its diverse and complex forms. The story of James and Isabella became an inspiring whisper, an urban legend told and retold, encouraging those who heard it to believe in resilience and transformation. A story of a young man who, in desperate search of salvation for his family, found an unexpected destiny and a greater purpose. And of a woman who, seeking inheritance and validation, found redemption and a purpose beyond the material. They proved that even in life's most complex and challenging plots, love, in its diverse and surprising forms, always finds a way to bloom, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary and what seemed impossible into a tangible reality. And so, they lived, not in an idealized fairy tale, but in a reality built on unwavering resilience, transformative forgiveness, and unshakable faith in the healing and revolutionary power of human connection.